Start recording. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us in this webinar for the Own Think Tank School. We have a very good webinar with Keith Burnet from Chatham House. Keith oversees communications at Chatham House, and he's going to tell us about new approaches to research, audience engagement, and impact. Particularly how to have greater impact without compromising the quality of the research, I think. Let me now stop sharing the screen. I don't know how to do it. There you go. So my name is Enrique Mendizabal. I'm director of Think Tanks, and Keith will be giving us a few ideas about this issue for the next 15 minutes or so. And then after that, I'll be asking him some questions, but also I will be passing through some questions from our audience. Quite a few people signed up today, which is very encouraging. So if you have any questions and you're online right now, please ask them using the chat option in the Zoom platform, and I will be asking those questions to Keith. Right? So I'll be taking note of them, and then I'll pass those questions on to Keith. The webinar should be about 40-45 minutes long, no more. And if we have any more questions, I encourage us to take them online and discuss them in an open forum. So without further ado, Keith, over to you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Enrique. Thank you. It's good to be here. I should say I'm in a hotel in Manchester, in the north of England. I'm perched on one of the suitcase holders, so I hope I don't go down, and I hope the connection is okay, because I've had to go on to 4G because the internet connection isn't strong. But if there are obviously any issues, then you can message Enrique and pass them on, or whatever. But I'm going to try and cover. I'm going to cover three areas. The first is on how we can take more dynamic approaches to the creation of research itself. The second will be looking at increasing engagement and reaching more diverse, and for Chatham House, more global audiences, and then come on to impact, influence, evaluation. And I should say that although a lot of what I'll say is directed or is about Chatham House, I hope that there will be principles and active actions that we're taking that will be obviously more directly relevant to everyone. So let's start with research. And for an organisation, not just like Chatham House, but I'm guessing for all of you, research is core to what we do. The original purpose of Chatham House, which was founded nearly 100 years ago next year, was for the scientific study of international relations. And throughout our existence, we aim to produce credible, independent, rigorous, and relevant research. And if you think about the evolution of the journey of how research was created, initially desk research, there was study groups, working groups, lectures. We used to publish lectures, and now we're engaged in simulations. We create partnerships. We work with digital communities on digital platforms, and we used to publish speeches, articles in journals. Then we evolved towards reports, and now we're doing polling. We're talking about how we can interact with our audience, not just engage. How we're using microsites, data visualization, and so on. So the journey is one that has evolved considerably, and some of the projects that we work on now, I'll give you an example of a few. We have a project at the moment called Common Futures Conversations, which is about how we engage the next generation in 13 countries across Europe and Africa. What are their common futures? What's the commonality? We're developing a digital platform that will allow the representatives from those countries and others, much wider audience, to engage, share their concerns, and to try and seek solutions to those concerns. We've got a project called Democracy in Technology, and in that we're looking at how technology is impacting democracy, but that's taken a more crowd sourcing approach, so that it's not just the experts that are within Chatham House's orbit. We've got a project called Syria from Within, and if you think about how we used to analyse the Middle East from London, now everyone who's part of that project is based in Syria, often journalists, often reporting from the ground, and that gives us a much greater sense of authenticity. We've got a project called Moving Energy Initiative, which is based around what's happening in refugee camps and getting energy in a sustainable way to the refugees. So all of those types of projects, along with what you might call more traditional ones, are feeding into not only how we develop the research, but how we engage with a new audience as we're doing the research, and therefore hopefully it's more relevant to audiences when we finally publish or take the findings and recommendations to a wider audience. So, and on top of that, then we have more dynamic content. We hope that brings a much more international audience, and it makes it more credible and realistic when it comes to making recommendations. And of course, it's actually more interesting, especially from a communication perspective, to be engaging with researchers who are working in those circumstances. So the second point I'll make is more around engagement with new and diverse audiences. And I don't really like that term, engagement. It's overused. We say it all the time in terms of communications. When you're moving away from a kind of broadcast model, engagement is the next level, and probably the next level on from engagement is immersion. And I will talk a little bit about that, but because I feel that that's the next step. Immersive experiences for not just from a comms perspective, but from an end user perspective. So what we're trying to do, and with the examples, some of the examples that I gave you, we want to embed our work in the day-to-day, developing research projects, as I said, in a slightly different way, but also the way that we bring people into the fold. So we have an academy for leadership, which brings young leaders or brings early start careers into the organization to work with the programs, the more traditional programs, if you like, and they are bringing their experiences. They then take their experience when they leave, and we build an alumni, a network as we go. We have projects like the Reinventing series, which is like reinventing the plastic bottle, reinventing fashion. They are projects that are out with the normal remit or perhaps the remit that you might expect from the organization. So there's an element of surprise perhaps. And again, they are bringing in and engaging new audiences. Where we can, we run events that are out with London, central London. And I'm guessing wherever you are, the more that you move away from the capital city or headquarters and engage with a wider population on the ground, becoming increasingly important. And we certainly found that in the UK, there's an element of experts being out of touch, not quite understanding Brexit. Sorry, 10 minutes in, I had to mention it. There's an element of, are we in touch? Are we in touch with what people expect and need from experts? So we have to evolve in that way. I'd actually also mention staff. The reason I'm in Manchester is because there's the top 50 inclusive employers, and Chatham House is ranked in the top 50 as an inclusive employer in the UK. It's really important. If your staff aren't evolving and changing and you're not bringing in new voices, then you're going to struggle. Your outputs, your research, your communications will not be keeping up with developments in the wider world, in the real world, as sometimes people might say. So for creation of new content, crowdsourcing to a degree, using digital platforms more innovatively. When I spoke about immersive experiences, I've seen some, I know the ODI did really good exhibition where you are presenting your ideas, and I know from our journal, International Affairs, they go to conferences, they're constantly engaging with potential authors as well as potential readers or subscribers. So this immersing and understanding and exchanging is becoming increasingly important. And for us, that's a very important direction of travel. And then when it comes to audiences, particularly, I mean, I feel that most of us will know the people in our orbit. We will know the people who we engage with on a day-to-day basis. If policymakers you're seeking to influence, you will know the policymakers, you will know who they are. Do you know your digital audience well? And are you engaging with them on the platforms and in the way that they want to engage? So a little bit of a statement of the obvious, but increasingly that is becoming more and more important. And Chatham House is doing a lot of work in that area. We're redeveloping the website for our centenary year. There's a new internal database, and we're doing surveys, polls. The more we can to measure what our audience wants, the better. And at almost every level, our audience doesn't want us, particularly a younger audience, they don't want us to just broadcast to them. They want to engage with us. They want to come, experience, immerse themselves in our work, hear from our experts, and where possible, contribute to our work. So that's a really important direction of travel. And the more we can do that, and the more I think all of us can do in those areas, the better. So when it comes to that, you need to listen to your audience and you need to act on what they're telling you they want proactively. And obviously, so for what that means on digital platforms, going to them, marketing and trying and actually failing sometimes. Very important to understand that not everything is going to hit in the way or land in the way that you want it to. Third point, and I'll be brief, and influence, again, slightly overused, but if you add into that mix, as we do increasingly, the evaluation, it becomes something that none of us can escape. And we know that, when we publish a piece of research, we've done some work recently on landmine clearance, and the outcome was involved the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, and his charity Hilo Trust, and it involved getting the government in Angola to commit to $60 million to clear landmines in the country. That's big, obvious policy impact, but there are lots of more subtle ways that think tanks can influence. And we published just a relatively small report on hospital detentions in the developing world, where people are held in a hospital. If you go, you can't pay the fee. You could go and give birth, you can't pay a fee, and then the hospital will detain you. And this is a big and growing problem. One relatively small report led to a lot of press activity, big spread in the New York Times, and then there are serious signs of policy change in a number of countries in the developing world. So that's big impact, but a lot of what we do is a lot more subtle. It's in the mix. So how do you measure that? I suppose there are maybe 3 or 4 areas for us. Across the organization, obviously we measure analytics for the website, social media, email. Like I said, we do sort of fairly regular surveys of our audience. When it comes to research projects, we have impact reports, we've got funder reports and evaluation, and we measure research under 4 categories, which is engagement, outreach, influence, and implementation. And the last category, and I would cite the 2 examples that I just gave on landmines and hospital detentions. That's a really big impact for us, and that's all about the implementation. Are policymakers listening and implementing our recommendations? So those areas, and then we do, we obviously look at the analytics for our publications, our expert comments on the website, and where we can, we publish. And so, where we can, we set KPIs. It's not a barrier. Numbers aren't the most important thing, but the engagement that we can get from, or the depth of engagement is becoming increasingly important. So we don't just want you to read an expert comment. We want you to stay on the website. We want you to explore. We want you to follow us, and so on. All sort of fairly obvious, but I think that we're definitely in a phase in a stage at the moment where this is deeper engagement is becoming more important than sheer numbers, if that makes sense. And then we share the analytics, we publish weekly trends, we look at page views, most downloads, and so on, and we share that with the research teams as widely as we can. So finally, just very quickly, I would say that this is our centenary year coming up, and we are the big next push for us is, how do we generate more immersive experiences, and how can we get better at proactively marketing across our digital channels, but elsewhere as well? And how do those activities mean that we're getting a deeper engagement and slightly less focus on numbers? Numbers very important, but it's the deeper engagement that we are looking for. And the final thing I'd say is, make sure you know what success looks like for you, because success can be measured in many different ways, but don't be too distracted or taken with what other people are doing. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Keith. That was a nice way to end. So lots of lessons from Chatham House, but not necessarily everything can be copy pasted into every think tank around the world. But
exactly.
I have a few questions actually, and this was really interesting. Let me start with one. As you were telling the story of Chatham House, the initial very short story, and reflecting on the centenary and 100 years of an institution that starts maybe in a more academic sort of style, and is now sort of producing and working along different ways of delivering the same purpose. So a lot of the projects you described are far removed from academia. They don't feel like something that you'd find lots of research fellows working around. So how has the evolution of communications at Chatham House and the communication team, and what the communication team thinks about and develops, how has that informed or influenced the evolution of the research approach or the research method?
That's a good question. I like to think it's done in tandem. I think that the research teams are aware that the world is changing. They are very well aware that if you're going to be doing work on Syria, it's very hard to do it from London. 10 or 15 years ago, it was probably more accepted that an authority on Syria could sit in London, obviously travel and visit Syria, but and again, I've used the word again, but the immersion of experts in the field, it comes from both. So you will have a journalist who will say to you, I don't want analysis that comes from someone based in London, but the researchers themselves will know that doesn't quite work. And one of the things that I realized, that I think it was in the 1930s, the woman who was head of Middle East research at Chatham House received a grant from Ford Foundation to travel to the Middle East. So I'm trying to work out. I think that was the first time certainly the first time for Chatham House, but that was quite rare at the time. It was certainly rare that it was a woman at the time who was in charge of research. But so you could argue that in a way that has always happened, but I think that it's clearer now that you can't solely do desk research. So this experience, I would say that both research and communications are moving together in a similar direction. And the only thing I would add is that I think that if it doesn't sound like academic research, probably at the base of it, there is research. There are still academics and researchers who are undertaking the research.
Yeah, Exactly. Another thing that I thought was interesting that you were mentioning here is this, at least I wrote it down as bring in and engage and go out and engage. So it's this idea that you bring people to your organization, you open the doors of Chatham House, the virtual and the physical, and you allow people to engage, you encourage them to participate, to contribute to the work. Which is, so one way of imagining this is that Chatham House offices are busier now with non-fellows, with visitors, with these future leaders that you're helping mentor, with collaborators that are becoming your partners and you're working with. And on the other hand, there's images of Chatham House fellows and researchers sort of leaving Chatham House and sort of going out there, right? So you kind of imagine this situation where at Chatham House there are more people from outside of Chatham House, and the Chatham House staff is more outside, out there, right? So is that a kind of the way it is in a way, is that you have more people coming in, coming through the doors of Chatham House, spending time in Chatham House, and at the same time you're spending more time in other organizations, offices, or other countries?
It's probably, I was talking about an ideal. This is a direction of travel. We start
Right.
to move in this direction. So when we were doing our brand review that we're doing at the moment, we're just completing, we brought in students from the London College of Communications. So
Right.
they're giving us their opinion on our brand, which wasn't entirely, they were speaking very directly, and they gave us insights that we wouldn't have otherwise perhaps really thought about or taken account of. And I don't want to over-egg it on the research side, because ultimately your opinion has to be credible. If you're feeding into the democracy and technology project, you have to have something of substance to say. And the more that we have to work quite hard at this. So I don't want to give the impression that people are just off and it's new voices, but it's a direction of travel.
Right.
And the more we do that, and I'm highlighting 4 or 5 projects, but that could be 5, it might be overall 5 or 6 projects that I might say we're doing in this new way, if you like, out of 50 or 60. So it's not the majority.
Right.
Outputs are still often ultimately a report, recommendations, but there's a direction of travel that's obvious. And for sure, when we listen to our audiences, they are telling us we want to be more engaged, more involved in Chatham House. Right. And that's not always going to be possible, of course.
Exactly. And so following on a question by Marilia Senetti, does this direction of travel create some resistance or tension between the worlds of research and communication at Chatham House? And if it does, how does your team, how do you deal with those potential tensions that may arise?
Oh, I guess there's always tensions between research and non-research staff and think tanks. Yes, sometimes, but broadly speaking, I could certainly give, although I won't specifically, but I can certainly give examples when I know that the communications team are slightly frustrated that this research, if we could only take it in a little bit of a different direction, it'd be more interesting for a wider audience. That for sure still happens. It's a perennial. But I think, broadly speaking, if you're interested, if your project is about democracy and technology, then you know that it's really only going to work if you can reach a wider audience, if you can use digital platforms. So perhaps there's the starting point is slightly different. It's like how are we going to make this work for this audience, rather than I'm doing my work and then I'll hand it to you guys soon, or when I'm done and you can do what you will with it. So does that mean a little bit, but it's not much. It's there, but it's not major. It's like we can work with it. We all understand that that's the case now.
That also means that you've been involved. You tend to get involved in the projects early on as well. So where you know what to expect from the research project, and at the same time, you can inform the research team of their options, of the ways in which you can help them along the way.
Yes. Again, for the bigger projects, that's ideal. And for a bigger digital project where we're developing a microsite or there's an online platform, then we have to work together at the beginning as much as as much as possible. It still happens that researchers will come and say, we've got this big project, there's a report and it's coming out soon, and can we work on it? And we think, well, if we're starting here, that's less ideal than we'd started 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And we could have better impact, we could plan better. That still happens. That happens a lot. But there is, we have planning meetings. What are the big projects? We have meetings with the people who are working on the applications. So we have a sense, but unlike Chatham House is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people. There are upwards of nearly 200 people working there. So that's a lot. That's a lot of outputs, a lot of activities. Keeping tabs on it, just a practical level, is not always easy. However, I think everybody has that issue, and it's just a case of planning as best you can and working together as best you can.
And when you do have the chance to work with a research team early on a project, is it the case that you have very clear policy objectives before you start, or do these policy objectives emerge as you go along? And I ask this sort of sub question is, at the beginning, do you have do you know exactly what kind of communication and engagement activities you're going to pursue? Or do these emerge as you go along, and you better understand the research and the outputs of the research, the conclusions of the research, and therefore the messages that are going to be possible to deliver out of that?
It's very mixed, and sometimes we did a project called Tribes of Europe, there were 6 categories of European, and the question was what kind of European are you? And it was a digital platform. There was a survey element, there was research, but ultimate goal was to get, not the ultimate goal, but a goal of the project was to get 75,000 people to take the survey. In the end, I think we had 120. So by that measurement, that was a success. The researcher, Tom on the Europe program, who led that, came to the comms department and said, this is the objective of the project, and worked. It wasn't always easy because developing the platform, that was a new type of platform, it was a new initiative for us. It wasn't always easy, but because from the research end, there was a clear idea of policy objective, it worked well, we delivered, we had specific targets and goals. That is always, at least for us, that's always the best way to work. Occasionally, a paper could be really interesting, but the target is 10 or 15 policymakers, and sometimes fairly senior. So the researcher might say, as long as I reach these people, that's enough. And then the comms team could say, actually, there's some really interesting other things in there. And, if we get articles, we get some social engagement, and they sometimes may not be interested in that, or say, you're skewing the message, or you're changing it slightly. So there could be a little bit of tension, and maybe if that's always the goal, then that's where, the discussions could lie. And then others are, it's often a work in progress, and things can change and evolve. And as you develop the research, something can come up that you weren't necessarily thinking about, and so on. So there's no one way. Right. The best way for sure is when there are clear targets that are decided upon in research and comms, and you work in tandem from the beginning.
And this sort of segues nicely into Helen Dempster's question on the chat. And she's asking about the situations where you might have researchers who are not that interested in changing the policy or the policy discourse. This might not be the case of Chatham House, but if it was the case, what advice would you have to someone trying to convince those researchers that they should also aim for these sort of policy goals and not just a kind of a knowledge generation objective?
Yeah, I mean, look, knowledge generation is great. Information and that's great. But I would imagine that most people in most think tanks, they're there to change the world. They're there to change policy or change a given situation.
Yeah.
So if researchers are not interested in that, then I would say that you got to start from the fact that, okay, let's generate some interest, let's generate a conversation. But I don't think I would actually almost say that Chatham House, we might have the opposite issue, which is that people are very focused on policymakers and sometimes less so on a general audience. But I would say that increasingly policymakers want a wider audience to be buying into the policy. So whilst maybe even as recently as 20 years ago, it is okay to target owners, now policymakers themselves want something a bit wider. Maybe that would be the way in. But yeah, I think we almost have the opposite issue.
And sort of related to that, and I was interested to hear you talk about the next step being about immersion, which is about depth. It's about fewer individuals understanding an issue to greater depth, the nuances of the issue. And we've been talking about public engagement for the last couple of years. And following a bit your argument of policymakers want to know what the public thinks, and in a way to reach a few individuals, we need to reach a wider audience, and we need to get our ideas discussed by the wider public. But what you seem to be saying now is the next step is actually narrowing down that public and making sure that fewer people are better informed about the issues. Do you see this as a public engagement and immersion, or is it simply that we are now sort of going back to a smaller audience but with a different approach?
No, I suppose look, the two aren't mutually exclusive. But if we're in a world where you've got virtual reality, people are using their TVs, that's the kind of immersion I meant. I did mean going deeper. People want experiences. If you have an experience, you're likely to remember more effectively. And if we run a simulation exercise or scenario planning exercise, that's immersing the policymakers. But what can come of that could make for a more immersive experience? There's a really good app on, there's an app on what happened. I forget who I was looking at the other day, but basically this is what it's like to be in a war zone, and this is what it's like to be in Syria. So you get a message across by immersing a participant. That part of it can be for a wider audience, that anyone can download the app. The immersive experience within the think tank itself is to do with the simulation and scenario planning with 20 or 30 people in a room. Whereas, decades ago, that was the study group or the working group. That group is now operating in a different way. But if you want to reach the general public, it's not just enough to send a tweet and someone reads it. The general public are going to be developing their interests and, in their leisure time. And so to reach that audience, there's another level, there's another step that is coming. I'm not saying we're not there, but some perhaps are. And I think that's what a general public will want. So it used to be, a name check on the news. Now it might be an app where this is what it's like to be in a refugee camp. This is what it's like to be in a war zone. What would you do next? That kind of thing. And there's an educational element to it as well.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I was just looking for David Nassar, who used to be at Brookings. He gave a keynote at our conference in DC in June, and I think he was referring to that, how there are now other types of knowledge generate producers, such as publications, Vox, for instance, in the US, or sort of the streaming platforms like Netflix, that will ProPublica will do events. The Economist will do events where people come and experience a number of talks, a number of exhibits, discussions that give them that depth, which you would have expected were the territory of think tanks. And so having a Netflix documentary or another sort of streaming platform documentary streamed to your living room and go deep into an issue is both a competition for a think tank in a way, but also an opportunity for think tanks to get their ideas, their research, their information into those living rooms. So you are reaching a wide audience, but not with a 3-message brief, but with an hour and a half or an hour-long piece where people can explore the issue in depth and understand its nuances.
Exactly. And it's not enough, or at least it won't be enough soon, if not now, for think tanks to say, here's my recommendations. Even in some interactive piece of digital on a platform, it's still, people will still, the audience, the general ones will still want more. And it's like, okay, what do you want me to do, or what can I do? How do I get involved? How do I change this? You're telling me, climate change, climate emergency is upon us. What do I do? For a think tank like Chatham House, you start to then get into an area of, okay, there's a little bit of advocacy, but nonetheless, people want action, they want information, they want education. And again, that traditionally, if we're only speaking to policymakers, that's fine, but policymakers want to know what a more general or interested public is doing, what they're thinking.
Yeah, and then there's another question here that kind of follows from that. So this is Chatham House. I think as you said, you have 200 people working at Chatham House, multiple programs. Not easy, but well-resourced organization. What about a much smaller organization, a small think tank, or a new think tank that doesn't have the 100-year history of a brand, that wants to reach a wider audience, whether it's through social media or through these other more immersive approaches? What advice would you have for them to grow their reach or grow their audience? So you now have an audience. You're trying to segment it, trying to maybe reach new audiences. But if you're starting from very little, how do you grow that initial audience? Or what do you think would be good advice for them?
Yeah. I mean, I heard Chatham House is like an ocean liner, but there are plenty of speedboats out there, and it's the speed. If you can react more quickly. You can do something that's almost more eye-catching, that's punchier, that doesn't take a long time to formulate, and has this weight of a big organization behind you, which is like anything. And there's pros and cons to anything. But if you're a single issue think tank and you're smaller, you build your reputation, you build your name, you make sure that what you're putting out is useful. You make sure it's consistent, that you're targeting people while you're marketing to them. You don't need a big mechanism behind you to. Look at Greta Thunberg. I mean, you can be a school child. You can get attention without being big, without having a big history. It helps on some occasions, and on other occasions it doesn't. But if your idea is there, if you have the drive, if you have the energy, you can do it. And you need to be consistent and credible, and you need to perhaps take some risks, and take risks in ways that bigger think tanks sometimes don't. And all of those things.
So I guess a key word here is consistency of your credibility in a way, right? So you have to be you have to ensure that you're communicating your ideas, the same ideas for a long period of time, that you are ready to react, but not necessarily thinking that there'll be sort of a get rich quick card there for you to take, and you'll go from a few followers to a few 100,000 followers overnight. You have to to play the long game.
Yeah.
Okay. Not 100 years, but certainly the long game.
a hundred years is a bit long. As I said, it comes with its own weights. But yeah, look, consistency is important. But we live in a world that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about politics. There's a lot of uncertainty about communications. What's credible, what isn't. Maybe I don't know. People make arguments and state their case, and where I would have thought that's not a strong argument, that's not a credible argument, but somehow it's accepted as such. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. So take advantage. What are the opportunities for you, for your organization, in communications terms, and in policy terms as well, because there are opportunities. So maybe focus on the positive.
Yeah. A final question. Do you think that people approach Chatham House because Chatham House has the answer, or do you feel people think that Chatham House might be able to find the answers? So that sometimes think tanks that we work with, they're struggling to come up with an answer to a question. But I feel that often the best think tanks are the ones that are confident in saying, we don't know, you don't know, that's why you come to us, and we'll figure it together. And what I need to do is I need to show you that I have the right people, the right processes, the right contacts, the right networks to find the answer, or the best possible answer to that question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess that I would hope that anyone who comes to Chatham House or any other think tank, you're coming for perhaps a greater understanding first. And if you're coming for answers, yeah, there are answers. And I think it's interesting. I think I would like us to move in a direction whereby we're kind of saying, look, if you want the answer, if you want to do something about the climate emergency, these are the steps that you should take. Now, we know full well that not every policymaker is going to follow every step, but if you can get people on a path to, you want to be here, starting here, so here, this is how you get there. If that's the answer, well, fine. I'm sure that many think tanks can propose, have recommendations and suggestions, but it's about how do you get there and how do you sort of get back on the path when you go off. But underpinning all of that, again, the starting point is a greater understanding. That, to me, is, I think Chatham House does that very well. Mm-hmm. And the more people listen to our recommendations, the recommendations of others, the better. But certainly there's an understanding in whatever sector or field or country your think tank is operating in. If you can give people a better understanding of what are almost inevitably a complex situation, then that's a great starting point.
Great. Well, that is a great way to end, sort of highlighting a key function of a think tank anywhere in the world is to make sense of what's going on. And I think that's one of the surest ways of getting the public to feel you're a credible source of ideas and advice in the future. So, well, thank you very much, Keith. If there are any other questions, I apologize, but I'm sure that we can connect online, and Keith has a Twitter account, and we can share some of these questions and ideas. The video of this webinar is going to be available soon on our YouTube channel, and I encourage people to continue asking questions and commenting on some of these great ideas. Thank you very much. We have, I think, one more webinar coming up soon, which will be on human resources, using the experience of the World Resource Institute in the US, and addresses one of the points you've made, right, about having a more diverse staff as one of the foundations of reaching more diverse audiences, and knowing who they are and how to engage with them. So thank you again, Keith, for your time, and congratulations on being one of the most inclusive employers in the UK. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much.